Up next, we have Gleb Dudka from T-Systems. I'm really excited to hear this one. We are hearing about how enterprise can provide infrastructure to blockchain and DeFi. T-Systems is a node on the Chainlink Network. We're happy to announce that a month or so ago. Very exciting news for us. And Gleb, please, I'm going to hand it over to you and take it away and tell us about infrastructure and blockchain. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy, for inviting. Let me just set up my screen first. Yeah, so I guess I can start. Hello, everyone. So as Andy pointed out, my name is Gleb from T-Systems. Today, I will talk about Web3 infrastructure provisioning. So the way we see a role of enterprises in things like DeFi and things like public blockchains. And I'll briefly touch on the convergence of IT and financial service later on, because I think this is what is driving a lot of change we are seeing right now. So just very short intro, so you know who I am and why I'm basically talking about this. So I'm a product owner of all things Web3 infrastructure within T-Systems MMS. This is a subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom. Deutsche Telekom is the largest telecommunications company in Europe by revenue. I believe we are the first large enterprise in the world to be basically providing public network infrastructure in terms of nodes, staking services, generalized mining opportunities. I'll talk about that later on. And I'm also, as a part-time and what I'm doing on the side as a hobby, I'm editor at Staking Rewards. So basically all things I was involved in staking from the earlier days with TESIS and Cosmos coming up. So when I joined T-Systems, for me, it was a very logical thing to to work on my passion, to continue working on my passion, and to because I saw a natural fit in telecommunications companies providing public network infrastructure. And more about that in a bit. So just to give a very short idea of how, there's this letter T, and everyone on Twitter was saying oh, this T looks similar to T Labs. So just to T-Mobile. So basically, to give a short idea, there's Deutsche Telekom, that's a big mother company, and then it has various subsidiaries, which is T-Systems, where I'm based, which is like software integration house, and there's also T-Mobile as a daughter company of Deutsche Telekom. So more precisely, where I'm housed or where I'm based is in Digital Trust Unit, and as you can see, we try to combine three different things. We combine security, data privacy, and blockchain, and for us, especially when we look at the infrastructure provisioning at operating nodes, I think that makes up for a nice fit, because we can then utilize our experience and, let's say, resources in those areas to focus on providing infrastructure. That's a little bit to my background. So I wanted to briefly touch on our blockchain thesis. So because corporates, and there's usually some kind of a misalignment between the public blockchain space, like DeFi, anarchistic, I would say, industry, while also there's this bigger enterprises trying to find their way in this space. So I think the way we see public blockchains, what our thesis, the way we look at blockchain and digital assets in general, they are basically, we see public blockchains becoming a base technology for, first of all, moving layer, so moving value, and the settlement layer for digital assets. And here we can talk different digitized assets, financial products, Web3 applications, and potentially even fiat money, as well as we know with Bitcoin and various other assets, it can potentially be seen as an asset class on its own. We also see this, especially in enterprise area, we see this as a medium for cross-company collaboration, having that blockchain as a single source of truth and so-called message bus. So, and to top that off, basically, we see the digital assets as being a very important and a key part of that. Because when we look at different projects in blockchain space and enterprises trying to find a way, they sometimes may just take the ledger, or they take just the smart contracts, and they hope that there is value being, value emerging solely out of this, just out of taking decentralized ledger. But we believe digital assets and tokens are basically what enables that value to, it's a USP of blockchain. Everything else we saw before in one shape or form. And then that's our thesis that we look in this space. So how do we capitalize on the thesis? How do we play a role or a significant role in the digital asset space? And there's, I mean, we are in Chainlink, right? So I had to post 1 or 2 memes. Basically, if someone hears Deutsche Telekom or corporate like running Chainlink node, providing public network infrastructure, somehow finding their way in the DeFi and staking, you might think something like this: oh, they're just doing it for the purpose of what, like, DeFi is hyped. My goal of this presentation is to basically show why I believe there's a more natural fit than it might look from the, yeah, like, which you might think just by taking a first look at this. Right, and I will structure my presentation, my narrative, to basically argue why the infrastructure part is very important and why larger corporates and enterprises are actually fit in providing that. Okay, so we believe that, I mean, Deutsche Telekom as a telecommunications company, right? So we believe that we have some decent reasons to be running infrastructure. I mean, historically, we started with running providing public network infrastructure in form of telephone towers, lines, to support the phone network, to allow people to communicate with one another, like call one another, transfer like voice messages, etc., etc. When you look at, okay, what's next stage, then we have the Web2, right, the internet. So then we have information transfer at way larger scale. So we are connecting people, organizations, and then the form of public network infrastructure, which telcos are providing, is internet backbone, optic cable service, etc., etc. So if we think one step forward, so what if we have this value layer on top, like people call it Internet of Value, right? So what if we have Web3 on top of Web2? How would the public network infrastructure look in that case? So, and then is like there are nodes, validators, block producers, transcoders, bakers, witnesses, supernodes. Every network has their own way to name those things. But at core, this is a kind of an infrastructure piece which needs to be provided, which needs to be robust in order the network to kind of fulfill its goal, because each network tries to fulfill certain tasks, certain goal, and it relies on those infrastructure providers to do so reliably and reliably in a decentralized way, and so on and so forth. So I believe telecommunications companies this is their kind of next step, or this is the duty of telcos to provide that infrastructure. Obviously, we are no longer talking about monopoly or something like this, because that wouldn't make too much sense. So it has to be decentralized, but at least playing a significant role in that. I believe this is what telcos, and this is what we are starting to actively work towards and look into. Okay, so basically Chainlink, this is a Chainlink event, Chainlink conference. So we are Chainlink node operators. So what's the status quo of us right now? What do we do? We are currently live on the mainnet on 5 price feeds. So for those who don't know, like we provide, we take real world pricing data, some mostly digital asset prices, and we feed them into the Chainlink network so that the various applications, like for instance DeFi, can utilize that data reliably and be basically provided with all sorts of guarantees about the accuracy of the data. This is like how I will not like dive too deep under the hood how that would work, or how that works on Chainlink. So by doing so, as I said, we help secure some value which is locked on the application layer. So we are providing infrastructure, and then with that, some applications are based on that infrastructure, and they rely on some service which that infrastructure provides. So currently the DeFi, let's say the value locked in DeFi is 10.3 billion, which is a lot. Most of that, as far as I understand, is powered by Chainlink. This is kind of our infrastructure. Like if you look at this long term, or even currently, by providing the data, we are actually monetizing a share of DeFi usage and DeFi activity. So from the infrastructure perspective. So we are not, as a corporate or as Deutsche Telekom, I find it very hard to imagine, at least right now, us playing an active role in DeFi on application level. So what we can do, we can utilize our experience and infrastructure to play it on an infrastructure level, while also where some value on the application level trickles down to the infrastructure providers. So just like we see in, like, let's say proof of work mining, yes, with Ethereum, Bitcoin, the fees are still low, but we might expect that to change in the future. So we are thus participating in generalized mining, and this is rather term. It was initially coined by Jake Brookman from CoinFund. So we are with generalized mining. This is like a general term to look at the space and saying we are providing some kind of IT service to a blockchain network or to like a set of anonymous actors, and then we are getting rewarded for doing so in a native digital asset of that network. So that's basically what we are engaging in, and I believe that we are the first corporate to do so. There are some providing infrastructure, but actually be able to directly monetize it via the respective digital asset, I think this is something more or less unique. And then staking, obviously, we are looking towards staking implementation. We'll actively participate in that as well. So basically, you might think, okay, what's like big company, traditional, especially German, like Germans are very, like say, traditional. How would you go with doing something like this? How would you go into like essentially generalized mining? How would you argue that, okay, that's what we should do? So yeah, that was quite a journey. I have to admit. Basically, there were many steps in the journey. So there was obviously the fundraise, and this is something kind of I just wanted to give more of an overview of how it all came to exist, because I guess from the outside it's not really obvious how that happens in a big company. So we had to do a lot of internal fundraising, obviously convincing, education. We had to argue what happens if Ethereum miner is a drug lord, like a drug lord is running like Ethereum mining farm and our fees go to him, what happens, or something like that. So we had all sorts of very interesting discussions going on. Basically, there's a lot of stakeholder management, development audits, making tax people happy. I put it as a separate point because that was the very hard part, I must say. Partner onboarding, we obviously have to onboard various institutional financial services like custodians and brokers. So we also have to kind of fit the new processes into our old processes. We have to crisis manage like the FAT and the insane gas prices. We also have to manage our treasury, many more. So what it turns out in the end, and this is what I'm going to talk in just a bit, we are essentially running a small scale fund where we provide infrastructure, we monetize this. First of all, we need digital asset, Ether, to be able to provide that infrastructure in the first place. And then we earn another digital asset link token in return. So basically, we have to manage a lot of things which come to the price changes. We will need to hedge, and basically we do some kind of an asset management on a mini scale. And I will talk about this in a bit. So I just wanted to kind of summarize of why we think there's a right to play for us in this space. So I think our core value proposition is we've been running secure infrastructure for German corporates for decades, basically. So we take that experience and security expert experience and our resources and say, okay, let's apply them to this new market, which is in infrastructure as a service, like blockchain infrastructure as a service, staking as a service, so on and so forth. Because that's what also seems to be valued a lot, like brand and security is valued a lot when one looks at the infrastructure providers. We are able to provide this, I would say, enterprise all-in package, which is like all of these things like enterprise-grade security certifications, compliance, SLAs, like the agreements and legal certainty about jurisdiction and so on and so forth. And we have one point I'd like to mention is that we have own cloud and infrastructure. So that kind of feeds into this, into the cloud decentralization, because we know AWS and Azure and so on and so forth, they capture more and more of the activity, especially right now with like infrastructure providers. And basically, if one of them goes down, then you might expect multiple nodes in your network to go down as well. So we are kind of uncorrelated to that. We also constantly looking, okay, how do we increase our service portfolio? Like what can we offer on top for value-added services? So there are multiple examples, staking dashboards, which will become relevant further for different protocols and for Chainlink in the near future. Network stewardship. We also do research, due to our profiles, we're also deeply involved in the ecosystem. At least I would hope to believe, due to staking rewards. We're also participating in various working groups. We're advising German government, new blockchain, and European Union on regulations. And we also try to kind of address those kind of problems and uncertainties with the regulators, which might come with a business model, a novel business model like staking. So the next steps for us, we will expand our support for various layer ones. So with our professional staking infrastructure, we see this as horizontal scaling. So we would likely scale across protocols. Some of them will be working with Chainlink. And also we will expand vertically. We are more and more, as infrastructure provision is getting more and more this characteristics of being a financial service, something which I will talk just in a second. So this is something which I cannot stop talking about, because I think I really like seeing this change, because I strongly feel with Web3, there's a conversion between IT services and financial services going on. So staking and generalized mining are basically financial service because they allow active network participation in exchange for rewards or yield. So if you're staking your digital asset, you are actively participating in the network, you're securing the network somehow, or you are participating in some IT service which the validator node provides, and then you're getting a share of that economic activity. So that's essentially, you have an asset, you put it to work, you make it up into productive asset, and you generate some form of return on this. And this is this is not the core business of traditional financial institutions. Their core business is enable yield, but not this type of yield. Because if, for example, for Chainlink, you provide weather data, no bank, or at least, I don't know, maybe they will, but I don't see it in the short term that the bank will run some will provide weather data to, let's say, insurance contracts on Chainlink. Or for Filecoin, banks will not provide storage space. And with LivePeer, they'll not do transcoding and so on and so forth. But this is exactly what is needed to generate that return. And there's this mismatch where the old financial world is not fit to do this, but now the IT service companies are fit to do this. So I feel like the IT service companies can capture a share of that market as the adoption for these decentralized network grows. And that gets me very excited, because I feel like this is another reason to say software is eating the world, or DeFi is eating traditional finance, or in some kind of combination of those narratives, where you say that, okay, now the IT service companies can capture really those services, like custody, for instance, which is also doing the core business of a bank. They have a vault, and the gold is in the vault, or something like that. So that gets me pretty excited. And the last point I wanted to make is, when we look at, I mentioned we are generating those digital assets. Oftentimes we are generating them at a lower cost basis than if you were just to go and buy them from the market. I mean, if the staking as a service company or a node operates profitably, then it means they're acquiring assets at a lower cost price, or at a lower cost basis. So basically, if we have that opportunity, what do we do with that opportunity, right? And those basically things which I would hope we would need to address, or we for sure will need to address in the future. And we have to think of due to that financial services and IT services conversion, we have to more and more think of ourselves as providing a financial service and kind of managing that accordingly. So I really like the narrative from Jake Brookman about the network lifecycle investing, where he says that every network, as we know, passes through different 3 stages basically. There's an early stage, and there's mid stage and late stage. And with early stage, there's the digital assets of the network, the tokens are illiquid, and this resembles VC style investing. Then there's a mid stage of the network where the assets become liquid, and then you are bootstrapping. So then you have to bootstrap the supply side. You have to run the nodes. You have to provide liquidity to, for instance, liquidity mining protocols. And then you have to participate in governance to guide how the protocol develops. So you have to provide a lot of supply side services, as he calls them. And then there's the late stage in the network. That's where there's like the assets become public, quote unquote. They are like more of a Bitcoin ether right now, where they are more like trading big cap liquid assets. And there you have to really think about how do you create applications on top of that blockchain? How do you drive adoption to existing customer base? And basically, to summarize, I feel like that the enterprises, the big companies, especially in the infrastructure space, their right to play is more pronounced in the mid to late stage, more at the late stage, because they can, first of all, support these networks with their professional infrastructure. They can potentially guide the networks in some places, but they can also then build on top of those networks and drive their existing customer base to these networks and to these applications. And that's where I would see us and our right to play in this space. So yeah, thanks a lot for everyone. Feel free to check out, check out anything, ask me questions, reach out. We can definitely, yep.
We have a few extra minutes, and so if you don't mind, can I ask you a couple of questions, and we can just keep this conversation going a little bit?
Yes, definitely. Just let me figure out how do I stop with the screen sharing. Okay. Okay, yeah.
Fantastic presentation, and something that occurs to me, it's really exciting to see not only enterprise taking on Web3, but to have people who really understand like what's going on with infrastructure and governance and staking. So that's extremely exciting to me. Something that stuck out is you said it's like working on a small fund within an enterprise. So is this sort of model within an enterprise like as its own division almost? Do you still operate with profit and loss? Like, are you still dealing with a lot of that traditional accounting, or is there different structures that you have to take into account?
Yeah, those are for now. Those are definitely the structures or the equations we have to ask and answer, basically about the P&L and so on and so forth. This makes our hands a little bit tight when it comes to certain networks, because we need to make sure that there's a business case for us to go into these networks. Where sometimes I would personally maybe say, okay, let's just invest and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So, and that's. Once we shift that narrative towards more of investment and a financial service company, if that happens, I mean, if that happens, I would see those type of opportunities being more, let's say, common, where we see this more of an investment, and then we do not have those very strict. But due to our nature as a corporate, we, at least right now, we do have to really take those things seriously, such as profitability, resources, like allocations, risk management, and so on and so forth.
Well, it mimics in some ways a lot of the VC type investing. An individual angel can just go crazy and invest. A VC's got a little more structure, and then you get into the investment banks and even more. Except this time it's just on that IT side. It includes this massive piece of infrastructure as well. Another question I have. Is there infrastructure that's like laying dormant in a lot of enterprise servers and compute that has to be on-prem that the enterprises are looking to use, or like those are sunk costs essentially? Are enterprises looking to turn those into revenue drivers, or is that conversation just now starting?
I guess this is like general conversation, not just blockchain, not just Web3, but it's just if you have a resource which, as you say, dormant, how do I utilize that resource at my best opportunity? And I do see that there's a lot of like the commercial, because I also, some of the key points of my job is basically looking at networks and figuring out how do the network economics look like, what's the business case for providing infrastructure to these networks, and how can we do this effectively. And basically, what I'm seeing is there are plenty of opportunities there, probably more than in traditional areas. So I would say so. That's what I would think as a interesting proposition. But the problem is you always have to do a decent share of convincing, and you have to tell them, hey, this blockchain is, it makes sense. Digital assets are not scary, and like those type of things.
Yeah, so we come from blockchain as a kind of a history of crypto anarchist, libertarian, sometimes anti-corporate. So you got to do some of that smoothing of relationships and ideas. Fantastic, Gleb. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the comments. we'll let you go here and we'll introduce the next speaker. I appreciate your time very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.